The earliest experience I have that really defined who I am was actually around the first grade, and it's the first line of my bio, but the story's a little longer than that. I had been following, the comic book stories and the Sunday, sort of Sunday cartoons, and had become obsessed with Batman. I think because he, as a hero, he was real. There was nothing magic about him. He just was an inventor and was sort of dead serious. He was passionate about crime fighting and kind of took it to the nth degree. And so I kind of obsessed with it. Went ahead and had my mother make for me a Batman outfit, which was pretty shoddy. It was a pillowcase cape and some paper ears and not much more than that. But I felt pretty legit. And I went to first grade that way for about 6 months, for a full semester, so to speak, of first grade. And the story that's not on the book jacket or in my bio is that the teachers were really concerned about me. they were concerned about my mental health and my stability, and they actually called my mother in and said, "Hey, listen, this is all well and good, but it's kind of disrupting the other kids, and we're a little bit concerned about Aaron and his boundaries. And could you ask him to come to school, dressed like a normal kid?" And I think most parents would have said sure, and not to get in trouble and kind of listen to the authority figure. My mother is a theater teacher and a pretty kind of out there, right brain person, and a little bit militant in her creativity. And so she kind of said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put any boxes around this kid. I'm not going to tell him what to do. He's a different kid. He needs to do his own thing, and I'm going to let him do that. And if you can't handle that, then we'll just have to move him somewhere else." And so they let me keep doing it, and I wore it out and moved on to the next thing, and ended up went to school in a sweatsuit for the second half of the year or whatever, something hideous. But I don't remember the experience, but what I know to be true is that my perception about authority, my perception about structure, and about disruption kind of came from those types of experiences that I had with my mom and my dad as a young kid, and that continued through through high school and even college, where it was sort of like, bucking convention has always been my instinct, and they have been supportive in that. And I think that's kind of the key thing in sort of making who I became. I think with all the work that we do, we're representing this thought process, this sort of digital worldview, which is a very disruptive one right now, and it's upsetting a lot of different industries in both a good and a bad way. And I think for a lot of people, they're doing a lot of analysis, they're doing a lot of waiting and watching, and what are the best practices, and who are the leaders, and trying to measure themselves against what's going on in the present moment. There aren't a lot of people that are leaping ahead sort of, in a fearless way, and unfortunately, I think the opportunities in the work that I do now are actually a lot more significant and valuable than the opportunity to dress up like Batman, but it requires the same sort of attitude. It requires an ability to say, I don't really care what anyone else thinks, I don't really care what it costs. I believe in my heart of hearts that I need to be, moving forward and changing the way we do business and becoming an operation that relies on these principles and these sort of capabilities. And we're gonna build that business. And so there's a little bit of zealotry and proselytism that goes into it. And I think that's sort of faith-based strategy to a certain extent. I mean, we work with definitely some of the biggest companies in the world, Fortune 100 brands, and the impression is that somehow the entity, the Borg, is not okay with disruption. But when you talk to CEOs, when you talk to marketing leaders and say, what do you want from your team, what do you want from your direct reports, all they say is disruption, 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 intense passion, and kind of a real leadership. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect between what feels culturally acceptable and what the mores of the enterprise are, and what's expected. And I've been recently rereading, which I highly recommend, In Search of Excellence, the old Tom Peters. And you read through some of those old stories, and it's clear that for 30 years, the big wins, the big new value creations, the big breakout ideas, they don't always come from startups, but they always come from unexpected places, from individuals, from the people that break off and do something. And that's how you get an Xbox, that's how you get a Hulu, that's how you get things that do take hold. So I think that the attitude and the fear is there, but the acceptance is there too. And in a lot of our projects, we just give people a nudge, and they actually find that they have a lot of personal and professional success that comes from that. Like so many things, it seems to be a communication gap and a measurement gap, where the measurement system that they've inherited, rewards people on a certain type of scale for certain kinds of performance, and that hasn't been augmented or changed in a long time. So that affects behavior a lot. And then on top of that, there's not a lot of top-down communication that really reaches the mid-ranks and the lower ranks about that idea of disruption and kind of pushing the boundaries. And I think for a lot of these folks, part of their scale comes from this sort of mechanized culture, the idea that they can make more widgets than the next guy, more efficiently, the sort of Henry Ford culture, and and that's the case in certain types of businesses in certain roles. But you'd be surprised, I think you wouldn't be, but many would be surprised how far down into middle management you can go and still have a lot of value from disruption. And if you're below that and you're disruptive, you'll either be fired or you'll be promoted to the ranks where it matters. The work that we did with Ford on the Fiesta Movement and the Fiesta launch in the US. Their agency, Team Detroit, which is a group made up of several other agencies, based up there, right on the property right next to Ford. They'd been talking a lot at the senior ranks about how to launch a car and how to launch a car to a group of people that maybe hadn't been in love with Ford and hadn't really had an experience with Ford, for better or for worse. And that was sort of that millennial crowd, the 20-something crowd. And they had gotten as far as, let's just put the car in these people's hands and see what they think. There was a lot of energy around the idea of just letting the product speak for itself, which we know from all great innovative products is 9/10 of the equation. You put an iPhone in someone's hand and the marketing is done. But what they really wanted to do was use that opportunity with a few cars and amplify it in a powerful way. And so what the project ended up being is a collaboration between TDI and Ford and our agency and a couple other partners to say, all right, well, how would we do this? How would we put a car in people's hands in a way that would really have an echo effect? And what was disruptive about it is a few of the rules we put in place were very resistant to the normal model, especially at the time, a few years ago. One was that we were going to let people say whatever they wanted. So there was no editing, there was no scripting, there was no approval process other than to make sure that no one was naked. It was drive the car, have some time with it, have some adventures, and if you want to get on YouTube and say that it stinks, go for it. And we'll pay for that. We'll support that. And the other side of it is that we really wanted to keep the Ford logo and voice out of it. We wanted to let this really be owned by the people that were doing it. And so the way the program took shape is 100 cars were given out to 100 people that were chosen for being good storytellers, people that told stories, but in the new way, people that were socially vibrant online. So they had a blog or a video channel or a Twitter or whatever it was, and they were gifted at using it. They weren't celebrities, they weren't big, no one knew who they were really, except for the people that followed them. But they were good storytellers. And we said, here's the car. You can have it for 6 months, free gas, free insurance, no questions asked, here's the keys. All we ask of you is that once a month, you do a mission for us, a special, have a special adventure with the vehicle. We'll figure out what it is for you. And capture it, put whatever your method of capture is, capture it on video, share it with your people, share it with our people. And say whatever you want. And the missions themselves were rooted around values and interest groups that matter to the car. So one month they were all about design, the next month they were all about adventure, the next month they were all about social activism. And it kind of all tied back to what we were trying to do. And the missions themselves were wild. It was everything from like learn how to wrestle a crocodile to mix your own record to go buy everything on the menu at a restaurant and take it to a homeless shelter. I mean, it was like completely out of the box. And people would edit these videos together and the video would run, and at the end of the video there wouldn't be a Ford logo, there wouldn't be a website, there wasn't anything. They just distribute them to their social graph and let the chips fall where they may. And what was incredible about it is that it was a program that was so different than the way they usually launch a car, right? Because there was no mainstream advertising at the time. This was 18 months before the car came out. There were all these things about it that didn't fit the mold. And as a result, it was something that kind of, it was cooked up, certainly at the highest levels, but it almost lived in the corner. It was in the dark. It didn't have a lot of support. It didn't have a lot of internal people working on it. It was the chosen few, the people that really believed in it, were working on it, and it was a small, nimble, disruptive team that was willing to kind of fight the good fight. And the partners that we worked with on it from a media perspective were all small, nimble, aggressive partners at the time. It was Mashable, it was College Humor, it was these types of folks. And it wasn't a Yahoo homepage takeover, So all those things were a little bit against the grain, and it really did live in a black box. And then when it happened, when it came out, it generated 500 million impressions without $1 of media spent. It was a real phenomenon among the people that used it, and people would call us from states where we had relatives or friends or whatever, and they'd seen the cars, but there were only 100 cars, so it was surprising how much traction it was getting. And ultimately, I mean, some of the videos that people submitted had 600,000–700,000 views, made by just an amateur person having an adventure. So they were real numbers to support it. And of course, the ones that matter most are, did it sell cars? And what was great is that it really did. I mean, in the first 6 days that the car was available, there were more than 1,000 pre-orders. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars of automobiles were moved in a very non-traditional way. And it had a really neat echo effect, I think, for the brand of Ford with this audience. And afterward, there was higher awareness for this car and this nameplate than a lot of stuff that had been on the road for years with this audience. So it really did connect. And now, of course, that's sort of the modus operandi, with that partner. And we all do a lot of stuff together that feels and looks similar because it's sort of proven out. Now it's safe and it can be expanded upon. But that was fundamental, and at the time it felt really risky. It felt, I mean, when we were recruiting the people, we were nervous that we were even going to get the right 100 people, much less, have it work at all. So there were a lot of those threshold moments. A few things come to mind. The first is definitely small teams. This was a team that could fit in a small conference room with everybody in there, and that's hard to come by when you're doing big things like car launches. So that was important. Subject matter experts, deep experts. So rather than having a bunch of generalists in the room, we had people that really focused on each piece of the puzzle and brought an A game in that thing. So like we do digital strategy, but we don't drive around and hand out and train people in cars. So another partner that was an expert in getting people comfortable with a car and moving it around the country and thinking about all the logistics around what if a tire gets flat, that kind of thing. There was a party for each question mark, so to speak, and that helped a lot. The third thing, and I think the most important, is that the people that really fought for this, both at Ford and at TDI and even within my organization, were all people that didn't quite fit the mold. They had an odd job title. They had they were a little bit outside of the norm. They focused on something that was not quite the standard. And so, those variances were really important. I think it gave it space to breathe, and I think that's the most important thing that the management can do, is essentially say, this thing needs space to breathe. We're going to give it that space, both through who works on it and where they work on it and how they work on it, and not impose the structure that creates the widgets. Because I think when you have large systems, the structures are designed to create uniformity. They're designed to create repetition. And if you're gonna launch anything that's going to be different or disruptive, it's got to be done outside of that structure. The surprises for me have always been about the sort of cyclical nature and just the human nature of what we do. I think we push a digital message as sort of the panacea for every problem, and we truly believe that it's part of the solution to every problem. But a lot of what has really kind of humbled and blown our minds is just how important it is to have, occasions for things, to have time for off-site discussion, to have physicality in the workplace, to be together, to rub ideas against each other, to have permission to communicate in certain ways, like having, the group has different almost keywords for difficult conversations. If I have a problem with you, I say I need to chew a piece of gum with you. Those kinds of things that give us a sort of a permission to do what we need to do. And so for me, it's about really accepting the fact that we are human beings, that we can commit to things that we forget, that we interact with reward systems and incentive systems and stimuli in a way that is unpredictable and complex. And so managing that stuff takes a lot of care, and it can't be mechanized, and it really needs to be treated as a complex subject and given the space to breathe and do what it needs to do. And so I think for us, remembering not to sort of over-mechanize, over-digitize, over-analyze things, but also let some organic development happen, and then use milestones and checkpoints and gatherings as a way to kind of look back and reminisce and collect and draw insights out of what we're doing. To have those occasions has been really, really important. All the disruption that we've seen in the content space and the social space is bleeding into other areas. So, you know, we work with a lot of folks that manufacture. We work with folks that manufacture very expensive things, and the instinct is to feel immune to some of these forces. But you see companies like MakerBot spring up, and you think, well, anything's possible. You know, the edges of this thing are hard to define. So I think one thing is to just look at a business today and say, what is analog in this business that could be smarter, faster, stronger, with data running through it, with information running through it, with a digital approach, and how do I kind of, you know, leave the analog where it matters, to my point about the humanity of it all, but pull it out where it doesn't. You know, if you're not using a tool like Expensify with your expense reports, that's one example out of 100 that are just being missed opportunities, just littering the ground, you know, that people are holding back on. And so I think that there's, you know, one big movement is that spread, and you know, no one is immune. I think everyone is being touched and will be disrupted further. So you kind of have to ride the wave or not. The second trend that I think is really interesting is just the idea that you know, that objects and information are starting to commingle in a really powerful way. And so thinking about, you know, smarter everything, and I love where IBM is going with this, but I think they have a very specific prescriptive kind of tools approach to it. But more broadly, you know, what is this information layer that's hiding over everything in our world, and how do we use that to you know, to do a better job at work, to get more information, to get more feedback. You know, my book is all about using game mechanics and dynamics in the workplace, and I think about, you know, how little feedback we get in a given day, you know, from our bosses, from our family, from our friends, from our stuff. You know, I have no idea, did I do a good job in my email box today or not? I have no idea, you know, and I think that's a travesty. So, so I think that idea of smarter objects and smarter feedback and data really moving through everything is going to open up and kind of uncork in a way that social did over the last few years as we look ahead.